I'm Christy Turner. I will be covering Chapter 1 of NFPA's Personal Training Certification course, starting with exercise physiology. This is Chapter 1 of your book. Like I said, we'll start with the cardiovascular, respiratory, and nervous systems of the body. The cardiovascular system is important because it transports deoxygenated blood away to the heart and transports oxygenated blood from the heart, taking it out to the rest of our body, our muscles, our brain, to the heart itself, to the lungs, all so that our body can perform its regular function. Why this is important is the body's demand changes when we add exercise into the mix. The cardiovascular system also distributes nutrients. It removes metabolic waste, regulates our pH, and transports hormones and enzymes. Now, the nutrients are important because nutrients are the energy that our body works from. It's not just vitamins and minerals, it's the stuff that our body needs for cellular function. The metabolic waste, through muscular contraction, metabolic waste is produced. Through the breakdown of food, we produce these chemicals that need to get out of our body or else they hinder our normal cellular function. So the cardiovascular system transports them through the blood and what we inhale and exhale. Also, the pH, the acid level, the alkalinity of the body, and the hormones and enzymes that are also a part of the cellular function. Two more things that the cardiovascular system helps with is to maintain the body's fluid balance to prevent dehydration and also to maintain the body temperature. It absorbs and redistributes our body heat. All right, first things first, I'm going to start with the heart. The word cardiovascular, cardio is the heart, vascular has to do with our body's vasculature, our lungs, arteries, veins. First and foremost, we all know that if there's a beating heart, you have a live person. So starting with the heart, we have the different areas of the heart, and these different areas help us understand how the cardiovascular system works. We have veins and arteries. Arteries take blood away from the heart. Veins take blood back to the heart. Now, to break that down a little bit more, we'll add in oxygen and nutrients to the mix. But starting out, we've got a superior and an inferior vena cava. And as you'll learn in anatomy, superior and inferior are anatomical terms. Superior is on the top, inferior on the bottom. So blood is going to enter both directions of this vena cava and enter the first part of the heart, the right atrium. In the right atrium, it goes through, it's called the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, then through the pulmonary valve. Now, the pulmonary valve is taking blood away from the heart just quick enough so it can get it to the lungs to get some of the oxygen that we've inhaled. It's going to take that blood back, fresh with oxygen, feed it back into the heart through the left atrium, the mitral valve into the left ventricle, aortic valve out into our aorta to the rest of our body for it to funnel through the system of arteries, capillary beds, veins, come back to the heart to dump off waste in the lungs for us to exhale out, pick up new oxygen, and start the entire process over again. Now, different parts of the heart that you need to be aware of. You've got the heart itself, and I think we all have seen some sort of an animal heart in our life, but heart is muscular tissue, and it performs repeated contraction relaxation, just like your bicep does when you perform a bicep curl. But that set of muscle is wrapped in a sac, and that sac is called the pericardium. It's a double-walled membrane, and that surrounds the heart. Now, the epicardium is the inside layer of the pericardium. The epicardium is the part that actually touches the heart muscle. The outside of the pericardium touches the rest of the body. Within that, you have the myocardium, and the myocardium is our heart muscle. It is the muscle that contracts and relaxes, allowing blood to exit the heart, move from one part of the heart to another, and that pressure from the contraction of the heart is what pushes the blood out and makes it possible to move to the rest of our body, all the way down to our toes and come back up. In your book, you've got diagrams. Blue and red, they're pretty universal colors when it comes to arteries and veins. Typically the red, it's red because it's full of oxygen. The blood in your arteries is going to be a bright red color because it is nutrient dense. It is full of oxygen. It's also full of iron, hemoglobins, everything, because it is taking good stuff to the muscles to feed it. Now the veins, they don't have the oxygen. There may be some left in there, but that's part of cardiovascular training, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But the veins pick up that waste. So you can see the two diagrams are fairly similar in the path of where the arteries and the veins fall throughout the body. They typically will pick each other up. The artery will feed into what's called a capillary bed. The capillary bed is mixed in with the musculature, and the veins are on the other end. We have another example here, especially going back to the blood flow from the heart as the blood leaves through the aortic valve into the aorta, a major artery of our body. The aorta splits off in different directions. And thankfully, you don't have to know all of those names of all the different arteries, but they'll go up into the brain, down all the way to our toes. And at each part where a major artery breaks off into different arterioles, those arterioles meld into what's called a capillary bed. It's kind of a spider web. And that is where this oxygen drop-off and biological waste pickup happen. And so the arteries, the red comes in, mixes with the blue, and the blue takes everything back out, up through the cardiovascular system, up through our circulatory system actually, which then takes it to the heart, which then takes it to the lungs, and we exhale. So just recapping the blood flow, it's an 11-step process. Blood enters the heart through the superior and inferior vena cavas, goes into the right atrium, then it passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Now this is the part where the blood needs to exit the heart, go to the lungs, pick up the oxygen, dump off the waste. It does that through the pulmonary valve to the pulmonary arteries. At the lungs, picks up the O2, some hemoglobin, travels back through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. From the left atrium into the left ventricle via the mitral valve, and a forceful contraction out of the left ventricle pushes all of the blood that's in that chamber of the heart through the aortic valve into the aorta, out to the rest of the body. Arteries, arterioles branch into capillaries. At the muscular level, O2 and CO2 are exchanged, bio-waste is picked back up, and the blood travels back to the superior inferior vena cavas. Now, the cardiovascular system, we've got the vasculature. Vasculature isn't necessarily our lungs. The vasculature refers to the veins and the arteries. Another part of what makes the cardiovascular system, you hear it sometimes called the cardiorespiratory system. You also hear the aerobic system. These words are all very interchanged, but when it comes down to true physiology, they are very separate systems. Cardiovascular has to do with the heart and the vasculature that carries the blood. The respiratory system refers to our lungs and the gas exchange involved in inhalation and exhalation. Now the lungs stem off of our air passageways. We have our nasal passage and our mouth passage. And air enters the body through our mouth or our nose, comes down through different parts depending on how it entered the mouth, eventually ends up in the trachea, into the bronchioles, and into the left and the right lung. Another important part of our lung is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is what enables the lungs to expand, to absorb that oxygen as they soak it up through the breath, and press back up to help push the air out through exhalation. So just to recap, the functions of the respiratory system are inhalation and exhalation. We all knew that. Also, transferring oxygen to the circulatory system. The circulatory system is our heart, is our vasculature, is the same thing as the cardiovascular system. And through the inhalation and exhalation, we rid the body of carbon dioxide, which we'll learn in more detail is a byproduct of energy production as well as other physiological byproducts. I'll throw out lactic acid right now because all of us have heard lactic acid in some of our workout life. The respiratory system is divided into two parts, the upper and the lower tract. Pretty much anything outside of the chest cavity here, so more up here, is considered your upper respiratory system. What you need to take into account is there is the trachea, there is an upper and a lower trachea. So pretty much the dividing line is in the middle of the trachea. So the trachea is part of both, but the bronchioles and the lungs, the diaphragm, the pleural cavity, all of that is part of the lower respiratory tract. A lot of us are familiar with those terms when we've heard of respiratory tract infections. But in terms of how our body works, this is where the blood exchange happens, and the upper part allows for that air to move itself through and out of our body. All right, a little bit more about the respiratory system. We know about the nose and the mouth, the trachea, the bronchioles. The bronchioles are two splits that feed into our two lungs. Now, we talked about the capillary beds, how they are where the gas exchange happens in the muscle tissue. Well, in the lungs, where exchanges happen are called the alveoli. And that is where oxygen and carbon dioxide, in addition to biological waste, bio and physiological waste, are exchanged to be expressed. So that is at the alveoli level. Your bronchioles break off and form kind of a raspberry looking thing like an alveoli. All of those bumps increase the surface area, if you remember from geometry a long time ago. By having kind of a bump-like shape, that allows for a greater surface area in which to have gas exchange take place. All right, little bit about inhalation and exhalation, which we all know are a major part of exercise and a very noticeable part of intensity level in someone's effort, because we can kind of tell how hard someone's working based on how hard they're breathing or not breathing. Not that they're not breathing. So inhalation and exhalation, they are for the most part involuntary responses. Our body innately has to breathe because our body does that in our sleep. We do it without thinking about it. We can we can control it, but there's a point to which we can no longer control it. So that is what makes it classified as an involuntary response. Inhalation, what happens during this process, there's nerve impulses to the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. The intercostal muscles are the muscles in between each rib that connect one rib to the next. So there's nerve impulses that tell those muscles that they need to contract, and when something contracts, you think of it tightening. Well, in this case, the contraction is allowing the ribs to spread so that the lungs will have a little bit more room. The diaphragm is able to lower down from our rib cage. It's typically pressing up into our stomach. It moves down. Our organs that are there tend to push out. And the most efficient breath that we can breathe as an athlete is in a deep abdominal breath. But a lot of people are a little too proud, and so they'll stuck in their abs. And you don't get as full of a breath because you're not making room in your body for your lungs to expand to their full potential. So this expansion, the diaphragm moves down. This is for inhalation. So think the diaphragm is moving down, making more room for the lungs to expand. Air comes in, fills up the lungs, does its switcheroo with the blood from the heart, and then there's a change in pressure. So because of this expansion, there is a change in pressure, and the lungs expand, fill with air. The pressure outside of the lungs and inside the lungs begins to equalize. That is when the point is complete. Then there's another impulse causing the muscles to relax, which causes a change in pressure again. The lungs contract, muscles, diaphragm goes back up, helps to push that air out of our mouths and nose. Another picture that's also in your book involving the diaphragm, a little bit better angle than the anatomical sketch, but you can see the lowering to make room for the expansion of the lungs and the exhalation where the diaphragm relaxes back up, pushing the lungs back up, causing a change in pressure so the air goes out the mouth. Now, as personal trainers, something that's very important to note is we call it the Vos Alva Maneuver. I call it holding your breath. And it's something that we all do when something's hard. I don't know, I can't explain why we do it, but you're trying to do a sit-up and and it's almost like you're thinking so hard about trying to get up, you forget to breathe. That's not really what happens, but pay attention to the next time you try and do a tough exercise. In Pilates, we use our breath to make a movement happen. You use the exhalation to help get your body to sit up, especially in a roll up or roll down. That air is very important in how you use it because then your muscles aren't trying to hold a contraction. They're able to help out in the movement that you're doing. The Vos Alva Maneuver, most importantly, has to do with the change in blood pressure. A normal, healthy person can handle this, but it's a good habit to get into because as we age, as our health changes, our bodies change, so does our hypertensive levels. And when someone is hypertensive, has an chronically elevated blood pressure, holding their breath causes an increase in that blood pressure. And when that happens, there's difficulty in getting air to the brain, to the heart. They've cut off the body's air supply. Of someone that's not healthy, they need it. They count on that constant flow of air to maintain normal physiological function. So Vos Alva Maneuver. Remember that, know what it is.